How would you feel if you could open up your banking app and see all of the money you'd make in your entire life right there, right now? All of the millions you'll make, no need to be ambitious, all of the millions, multi-millions, hundreds of millions you'll make on your banking app this second, would it make you happier or would it make you more anxious? What about if we changed that currency for something even more important? What if we saw the days that you had left? How many weeks, how many months, how many years? Right there on your app. Just tap the app. You can see your money, your days. How would you live your life differently? Today we're going to be breaking down these questions through a two-part exploration of retirement psychology and money psychology, and a bit of a real-time strategy game approach to lifetime resource management, because this is something that I do far too much of the time behind the scenes, and I think it's going to help you to understand money psychology and especially your money wounds on a much longer timeline that you may have not considered. It's not going to be a generic mainstream self-help video. You can read these books if you want to, but fundamentally, I want to give you an opportunity to reflect on a question that you might not have asked yourself. What would I do if I knew all of the money I'd make? What would I do if I knew all the days that I had left? And crucially, what would I do if I could chart the money across a lifetime? How much would I give to myself now? How much would I save for the future? We can never get this equation perfect, but there's some intuitive, deep sense inside of us, especially if you're like me and you're someone who's entrepreneurial or you take your career seriously, you're interested in wealth and impact and managing your money, managing your resources over the course of a lifetime. How much do you invest for the future? How much do you spend in the present? This goes deep into money psychology. And fundamentally, we need to change some of the ideas that we have around retirement. I'm going to flash some books in front of you because I'm starting to come to the opinion that our idea of retirement is thoroughly outdated. It's thoroughly outdated for people who are in more conventional 9-to-5 stable careers, but it's especially outdated if you're anyone who's entrepreneurial or if you work for yourself or if you have a bit more of a high-flying career in one form or another. When you start reading retirement psychology, you come to books like James Hollis's The Middle Passage, and Misery to Meaning in Midlife is very much the process that people typically go through between 35 to 55. They have a reawakening of the soul. They start to cut away things which are no longer important to begin their next endeavor. But what about when you're actually in the retirement era? Well, you start to read books like A Time to Live, and this one's about the 7 steps to creative aging. This is one of my favorite of the retirement psychology books. We've also got books that have these kinds of wonderful titles, From Aging to Saging. Isn't that a bit of fun wordplay? We can go a bit more Jungian. We have books like Coming to Age, and then about the croning years in late life. This one's especially useful for deep late life in your 80s and your 90s. This one's got a especially beautiful title, Dancing with the Muse in Old Age. Retirement becomes a bit more reinvigorating, and sometimes we just need to ask ourselves a very basic question, like, what are old people for? In case you forget that you will indeed grow old, don't forget that it's worth preparing for the future psychologically if you're also preparing financially. And then on the other side, we've got some very classic books. You've probably seen this one before, The Psychology of Money. Honestly, it's not necessarily the best book that I have in my library on money, but the title is related to this video. The Millionaire Next Door, which shows your strategies of wealth building across a lifetime. And if you're like me and you're a bit interested in stock markets, you could read a financial book like The Devil Take the Hindmost, which is a history of stock market speculation and the psychology of mania and euphoria, when people believe that they're going to get rich quick, and there's all kinds of ventures in the 18th century and the 19th century which leave you much poorer and much more stressed than you could have dared to imagine. Humans are flawed. That's the point I'm trying to make. No matter how much diligent planning you might do, you will not get it perfect. But you should at least make the effort. When it comes to managing your money and managing your time and the relationship between money and time, not just in terms of compound interest, but in terms of inheritance. We usually think of this as a term that we reserve for our children and our grandchildren. We like this idea of building wealth to leave a legacy. What if you have a self-inheritance? This is something that I've been playing with for the last few months. What if part of your reparenting process, part of healing your inner child or your inner adolescent, were to realize the amount of money that you're going to make in the end of your life, and to really bring that in as something that you take seriously at this stage in your life, and you give yourself a bit of an inheritance early. This is something that I've been doing, and it's not for everyone, because generally speaking, you've got money wounds that go in two directions. You're either an overspender or an oversaver. I'm firmly in the oversaving category. We'll come to this later. But this idea of self-inheritance can apply to both camps. If you're on a certain career path, or you're maybe transitioning career paths and you know where your money's going to be in your 50s, your 60s, your 70s, you have a rough idea of what you might be dying with, know how much of that's going to tax, know how much of it's going to your children who are already going to be in their midlife, and look at the usefulness of that. Start thinking about money and time and health and energy in a whole different way. Because what's the use of giving $2 million to your 50-year-old son? Why not give 20,000 to your 20-year-old son? Why give 10 million pounds, dollars, euros? You're extremely wealthy. Let's imagine in a scenario you give all of that to your 3 children, but they're in their 40s and their 50s because you followed longevity principles. You lived until your 80s, your 90s, your 100s. They're even older and they've already got their own family. Wouldn't it be better to give that money to them earlier in life, to enrich them through education, to take family vacations and spend while they're young? Something you can probably agree on. You can come into this idea of, if I think about it, money's probably best spent between 18 to 30. I'll have the most impact on my children as a wealthy man or a wealthy woman if I can support their first car purchase. I didn't have this particular situation myself. I had no money from my parents. In fact, fun fact, when I was 10 years old, I learned from my father rather directly, you will not get a single penny from me. He didn't have many pennies to give. Didn't grow up in a rich family, but for some reason or another, I knew that there would be no inheritance, and I was told that at 10 years old, so I had no idea around when my parents are no longer here, I'm going to have some money to fall back on, so I had a bit of a different developmental path. But on the opposite side, we tend to try and provide comfort and security to our children by making some kind of indication that there'll be some money left over for them. And if you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s and this seems way off, just hold on. I'm going to make this about your inner child in just a moment, and it's really going to come together. You're going to unlock a new relationship to money and time. In a literal sense, we give money to our children in our late life because we can't do anything with that money anymore. There's nothing more that we want to spend on. We start gifting. If you look at these retirement psychology books, you gift. You gift money because it's no longer worth that much, but the joy and the impact that you can give to other people is so fulfilling. At a deeply spiritual level, it's fulfilling to give. What if we bring that giving earlier? Statistically speaking, the most important time to receive an inheritance in terms of major financial decisions is between 18 and 30. This is when people are getting their first cars, it's when they're doing education, it's when they're starting businesses, it's when they're putting a mortgage deposit down on a home, or it's when they need some kind of enriching experience like, dare I say it, traveling and backpacking or volunteering somewhere. Money buys all of these things, and it also buys the ability to settle old debts, for example, student debts, or to settle mistakes made through dodgy credit card choices, or maybe in the future, the next wave of cryptocurrency enthusiasm. Your 20-year-old son, God bless his heart, he just made some poor choices and now he's 10,000 down the hole. What are you going to do about it? Probably best to teach him a bit of a lesson, probably best to not bail him out fully, but there's a love that can be given in those moments, and what if you take that same psychology, if you're in your 20s, your 30s, or your 40s, hell, even if you're in your 50s, give yourself a self-inheritance early because you look after yourself now in the same way that you'll look after your children when you're gone. This changes the game. For me, it's changed the game as an oversaver because quite openly, I didn't grow up with a lot of good stories around money. Money for me was something which was really scarce. There was a lot of agitation attached around money. If I'm going to be completely honest, I didn't even like gift giving because for me, unfortunately, gifts were never given without threat or consequence or a potential consequence. If a birthday is coming around for several months before the birthday, my birthday is in the April, behave, or that gift isn't coming your way. A few months after the birthday, you better behave, or that gift's being taken away. Then we're about by Christmas, you better behave, or that gift's not coming there. And then, of course, you better behave or I'll take away the gift. You can imagine any video game or any particular enjoyable item that a child might want if you're living in perpetual threat around a gift being taken away from you because of somebody who doesn't understand necessarily that a gift is a gift, and these old school outdated parenting techniques. That's something that I grew up in, and it might sound like it's extreme, but I've also spoken to people who've grown up in a variance of that. Maybe it wasn't so extreme as mine, where it's whole year I could take it away at any moment. But most of us have heard a variant on you better be good because Christmas is coming around. These stories that go deep inside of us, or hey, remember what I got you for your birthday, or hey, remember how I bought those driving lessons, hey, remember how I helped you out with your school fees. There's invisible debts that parents sometimes manipulate in their children at a shallow level. These kinds of stories are inside of me and are inside of many of the people who watch these videos. Your story might be different, but fundamentally your responsibility is to change the story for the betterment of yourself and the betterment of your family. I opened this video with the idea of what if you could open up your banking app, literally open up your app and see how much money you'll make across the entirety of your lifetime. How would that change how you live today? Would it mean that you would save way more because there's not as much as you thought there would be? Or does it mean that you'd spend a bit more on yourself and you'd be indulgent? Did a recent video on indulgence, but indulgent in the true sense, from the original Latin, indulgence coming from a kindness or a favour. What kind of favour would you give to yourself? And if we take it up a level of complexity, when you're planning your time, what kind of favour would you give to yourself if you knew how much time you had left? Not just a long life where the last few years, usually for most of us, are at a slower pace with less health, but how many days do you have with this level of consciousness, with this level of interest in a video like this before life gets too busy or your health starts to take a turn? Pause and consider these questions. If you're looking for a pretty readable book that kind of captures the themes all together, you can read this wonderful orange book. It's very accessible, and the title itself is very much what I want you to focus on. Hopefully you can see it there. The 100-year life. According to recent statistics, a child born in the mid-1990s has a coin flip possibility, 50-50, of living to over 100 based on modern medicine and the advances in medicine over the course of our life. Many people are going to live until their late 80s, their 90s, their hundreds, and maybe someone's watching this video through whatever social media platform exists in the 2100s. I may still be here, I may not be here. Hello to future me, I am dead. This is me in the past. We see people from the past. I'm dead. I guess I'm dead. I died like everyone else. Isn't it ironic that I'm talking about retirement psychology and living to 100? Just look how that worked out for me. It's short. It's gone. Look at the wounds, look at the stories around money, look at the stories around retirement, and start to form your own narrative. For me personally, this idea of self-inheritance is a deeply inner child healing principle. If you grew up in money stories where there was poverty, scarcity, threat, fear around money, watch out for oversaving habits where you're making very clever choices about what to invest in and how to manage your time, your 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% savings rates. Just look out for those stories and look back at your inner child and say, yes, I'm trying to do the best that I can. I didn't have the best financial upbringing, but at what point am I robbing myself for a future that I may not see? Or at the very least, to what point am I robbing myself completely unnecessarily? Let's imagine you're retiring with 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. It's more obvious in a more ambitious sense that you don't need those extra millions. People give them away. Look through these retirement psychology books. Men and women give away their wealth in their lifetime, or they set up trusts to be able to give their wealth away to their family for a multi-legacy purpose. If they make a lot of money, that's what they do. They can't spend it all. Just look beneath the surface. If you're an oversaver like me, if you're someone who's in a fortunate position to make more money than most people and to be able to save more money because you don't care about spending on things, and you've got this little buffer where it starts to be a couple thousand extra that you don't know what to do with, and like, oh, I'll just put it away into the future, that's a good psychology for the mainstream, because most people overspend. But if you're good at managing your money, you might be blind to the fact that you're stealing from yourself. In the same way that you might be blind to the fact that you're stealing from yourself and that you only have a certain number of days left. And a certain number of days with this clarity of consciousness. How would you look after your inner child? How would you look after your inner 20-year-old? How would you look after your inner adult at the age that you are, from the perspective of your wise old man or your wise old woman archetype? Looking back at the end of your life, what do you wish you had have done differently for this day? How much money would you have given yourself? I imagine If you're in a position where you've been sensible and you've saved, you've got more money than you need in your 80s, 90s, or your hundreds, it might be the time to bring a bit of that forwards. Just pay attention. On the other side of the story, we have people who are overspenders, or people who don't take their finances too seriously. People who are living for the moment, people who are okay going from job to job, or having periods where they're not too interested in making money, and it works, somewhat it works, for your 20s and maybe into your 30s, but when you're looking after family, and you're trying to plan for your own age-old, I can't make any more money, or you don't want to make any more money, just look at the reversal effect right there. This is classic psychology. I'm not going to go too much into it. We should all be saving for our future. Yes, a little bit more than the overspender might admit. Overspending is a symptom of not being connected to the future self, but oversaving is also a symptom of not being connected to the future self. This psychology is very niche. It doesn't apply to everyone, but many of the people who watch these videos, maybe yourself, we're quite ambitious individuals who want our spirituality and our financial sensibility to be interwoven together. If you're looking to give yourself the gift of financial wealth to make an impact on this world, to be able to feed yourself high quality organic food, or get the kind of professional medical support that you need right now, unnecessary support. What about alternative healing modalities? Going and getting chiropractic care, getting sports massages, getting saunas or cold plunges, all of these biohacking things. Would you give it to yourself if you knew how much you'd make and how long you've got? You probably would. Just take away from the things that aren't worth it, in the same way that you'd happily give 20,000 if you've got millions to your son who made a mistake. Just look at yourself through that same lens. You're not going to give him 20,000 to go and get beer and cigarettes, but you'd give him the things that matter. Because that's a father's love, that's a mother's love. Just something to consider. I can't give you the answer. It depends on your psychology. It depends on your deep intuition of how long you feel you're going to live and what kind of work you think you're going to be doing in this life. For me personally, I plan to be working well into my 80s. And the reason for that is, if you look around this library at all of these wonderful men and women who've written psychology books from the last 120 years, their best works, their magnum opus, or one of the top books that we remember them by, they're usually written between age 50 and age 60. Many of our favourite authors, Carl Jung for example, he was writing well into his final years. We look at modern trauma teachers like Bessel van der Kolk, Gabor Mate, Peter Levine. They're 80, 81 and 82 years old at the time of recording. If my memory serves me right, they're all in their early 80s. Many of the most powerful and vigorous minds in psychology, healing, spirituality, literature, philosophy, they thrive and blossom in their late life. So yes, I'm trying to give some money later on, but I'm also aware the earning potential goes up as you go older. At least if you're making good choices in your career, your earning potential goes up. So the time is more of a factor that you need to deal with. You need to make sure that you're not bogged down in too many responsibilities that get in the way of you teaching, writing, or experiencing at your best, a workshop, whatever it might be. You need to make sure that you're managing the time and the energy commitments, but also look at the money commitments and start playing along the decades. For me personally, I have a very particular life. I truly believe that my life gets better every single year, and I've experienced this since age 16 until right now. Every single year my life's gotten better. I've felt healthier, I felt stronger, and I've had more of a sense of who I am. And I'm looking forwards to experiencing that in the future. You don't need money to get some of the most valuable things in life. You need a certain amount of money to be able to self-actualize, and this is something that I'll talk about in future videos. You need a certain amount of money to truly become your best self. Again, high quality food, good shelter, educational experiences, moments of joy and pleasure and leisure, and indulgences, that Latin word, kindness or favor. They require money. Crucially, they require time management. They require time management across a lifetime. Don't rob yourself in the present for an imaginary self, but don't ignore your imaginary self. Don't turn a blind eye to that 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old version of you, because again, if you read a book like The 100-Year Life, many of the old ways of saving for late life, to kind of finish work at age 55 on a 10% savings rate, it won't work if you're living another 50 years. You'll run out of money. Crucially, you'll run out of money. You might need more than you think. If you've crunched your numbers, you've done the investment compound interest calculators, you're someone like me who's interested in these kinds of things, and you're mapping out your annual salaries, and it's fun, and you're trying to think about this. Consider the impact of you dying 20 years later than you actually planned for. Look out for yourself in your deep old age. Let it simmer. Practical advice to end the video on: I haven't got any. You're your own person. You have your own goals, you have your own ambitions, and your own sense of how your life's going to play out. Just don't rob from yourself now. Inner parenting, inner child work is about going back into the past. It's about looking back into those areas of wounding, those areas of neglect, those areas of abandonment, and trying to work with them on an interior level, but also creating new material conditions which change the feeling of being you. If you didn't grow up with money, it's a very, very, very sound idea to make a bit more money in your adult life so that you can practically look after your inner child. If you grew up in a situation where you didn't receive love, of course, prioritize loving relationships. Many of the wounds that we suffer in our inner childhood, in our literal childhood and an inner child within, they can be healed through action in the present day. Look at the wounds that you're suffering from now. Look at the ways that you're distorted in your relationship to money and time. If you're frivolously spending time, and I will do it yet again, if you're frivolously spending time scrolling like this, or maybe you're like me and you like to double screen and double scroll at the same time. I don't do this, it's just my online phone and my offline phone. This one had the notes of the video, but imagine I'm double scrolling at once. Some of us are doing that. Don't be surprised when a decade's gone by and you've scrolled yourself into oblivion. You've probably already done a bit of it. I know I have. When did you first start using the internet? When did you first start scrolling? How many hours per week? Don't waste the opportunity. You deserve so much more than this. I'll see you in the comments section.